Hello friends, I won't take much of your time. I just ask you to subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
When I saw the bill, I thought it was a mistake. A glitch, a data error, maybe someone skimmed my card. I sat on my couch in my bathrobe, one sock on, one missing, squinting at the digital statement on my phone. I scrolled through line after line of unfamiliar charges. High-end boutiques, a sushi place I'd never been to, and something called Globar LA. I live in Ohio. It didn't feel real at first. I kept telling myself, don't overreact. These things happen. So I called the card company, explained the charges weren't mine, and started the usual fraud claim process. But then the customer service rep paused and said, "Wait a second, ma'am. One of these stores flagged a purchase. They took a photo of the buyer. You want us to email it to you?" "Sure," I said casually, still thinking this was just some idiot who got lucky guessing my numbers. I refreshed my email while making coffee. And there it was. A blurry security cam still from inside a Nordstrom. The guy in the photo had his back turned, but I'd know that leather jacket anywhere. He wore it every Thanksgiving like he was in a band. My brother, Zach. I stood there holding my coffee cup in the air like a statue until the realization hit me full force. My brother stole from me. Not metaphorically, not emotionally. He literally stole my credit card info and went on a damn shopping spree. I didn't call him right away. That was the old me. I didn't give him the chance to lie, deny, or play dumb. I drove to his house, an hour away, wearing the same sweatpants I slept in and a hoodie that said, "I'm not arguing, I'm just explaining why I'm right." It felt appropriate. Zach opened the door like he'd been expecting me, like he was happy to see me. That fake smile of his stretched way too far across his face. "Dana, wow, what a surprise." I didn't say anything. I just walked past him, right into the living room. His girlfriend Shelley was there, sitting cross-legged on the couch, surrounded by shopping bags. Expensive ones. She had a full face of makeup at 2 in the afternoon and the kind of manicured nails you can hear when she texts. She waved with a "hey." I ignored her. I pulled the printed statement from my coat pocket and dropped it on his coffee table. He glanced at it, then looked back up at me like he was waiting for me to perform. "That's cute," he said. "You brought homework." I said nothing, just waited. Zach finally picked it up and flipped through a few pages. His eyes narrowed, not in guilt, but in mild annoyance, like I was bothering him during a commercial break. He tossed the papers back down and leaned against the arm of the couch. "What's yours is ours," he said, shrugging. "That's what Mom always said." For a second, I genuinely thought I might lose it. That phrase, that tired, overused, guilt-drenched phrase, it came from our mom, who passed away 2 years ago from a slow, painful decline no one talks about unless they've lived it. But she said that when we were kids. She said that when he wanted my Halloween candy, and I didn't want to share. She didn't say it so he could buy designer sneakers and champagne facials on my credit card. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't accuse. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out the folded piece of paper I'd been saving. I placed it gently next to the credit card bill. Black text on white paper. The bolded header read, "Police report, fraudulent charges." He stared at it for a long time, his cocky half-smile starting to fade. "You called the cops on me?" he asked. I looked him dead in the eyes and said, "No, Zach. I filed a report. The police just happened to agree with me." Shelley suddenly stood up like she just realized the room had turned into a courtroom. "Wait, is this serious? He said you gave him permission. He said you shared everything. Like what?" I snapped, turning to her. "Like a loan? Like a savings account? Like an emotional support animal?" She backed up a little, mouth open. Zach stepped forward, but only half a step. "You wouldn't really go through with it," he said, lower now. "Not this. Not to me." I laughed, not a normal laugh. That kind of low, bitter, almost amused one you get when someone insults your intelligence and expects you to thank them. He looked smaller than he did a minute ago, not physically, but diminished. Not the golden boy of the family, not the charming screw-up. Just a grown man who thought entitlement looked good on him. I leaned over the coffee table and said, very calmly, You thought you could rob me blind and hide behind Mom's ghost, like that would make it noble. But here's the thing, Zach. You used her words to steal from your own sister. So now I'm using mine to take it all back. And with that, I turned around and walked out, hearing nothing behind me except Shelley whispering, "You said she wouldn't press charges." I didn't answer. I didn't look back. I didn't feel bad. The real question wasn't what Zach did. It was how long he'd been doing it. And I intended to find out. All of it. The strange thing about betrayal is that it rarely feels like a single moment. It's more like a slow leak that you don't notice until the floor is warped and the damage is permanent. Sitting in my kitchen the morning after I confronted Zach, staring at the same cereal box I hadn't touched since last week, I couldn't stop thinking about all the little cracks that had formed over the years. All the times I'd let things slide because he's your brother or he means well, or that dreaded phrase, family comes first. But what no one ever tells you is that sometimes family is the one tightening the noose behind your back while patting your shoulder in front of your face. Zach had always been the charming one, the one who could talk himself out of anything. As kids, he'd sneak extra dessert and blame me, and Mom would buy it. When he flunked out of his first college, she told everyone it was a bad fit, while I worked 2 jobs to finish school on time. When Dad left, Zach melted down, disappeared for weeks, and came back with another apology and a story. I, meanwhile, picked up groceries and held Mom's hand through doctor's visits. I kept the house running when she got sick, handled the bills, sorted out her prescriptions, made sure the hospice nurse had what she needed. And Zach would blow in every couple of weeks with a bouquet of flowers and a heartfelt speech that got all the tears flowing again. He had always been like that, loud in emotion, quiet in responsibility. The day after I filed the report, I drove over to Aunt Linda's house. I needed to hear someone else say it, someone outside of my own echo chamber of fury and shame. Aunt Linda had always been the no-nonsense kind, the one who wore orthopedic shoes and still managed to walk faster than everyone else. She answered the door before I even knocked, probably heard my engine from inside. "I figured you'd be coming," she said, moving aside so I could step in. I didn't sit right away. I paced her little living room, stepping over magazines and old crosswords, the same ones I remembered from childhood. She watched me for a while before saying anything. Then she asked, "Is this about your brother?" I nodded and finally dropped into a chair. For a while, I just sat there with my hands clenched between my knees. When I told her what Zach had done, about the charges, the police report, the Nordstrom photo, she didn't look surprised. She just let out a soft sigh and said, "I knew something like this was coming. I just didn't know who it would hit first." I blinked at her. "What do you mean first?" She walked over to a drawer, pulled out a small stack of opened envelopes, and handed them to me. They were letters, mostly formal notices from credit companies, and one handwritten note from a cousin in Michigan who'd loaned Zach money last year for a business venture. Apparently, Zach never paid him back, said the bank froze his account, then ghosted him. Another letter described a bounce check Zach wrote to help pay for Mom's headstone. Aunt Linda had quietly covered the difference. "He's been doing this for years, Dana," she said quietly. "Little things, spinning stories, making promises, always just short of legal trouble, but plenty deep in the hole of manipulation." I felt my stomach twist. All those years I spent defending him, telling myself he'd grow out of it, that he was just struggling, that he had potential, and now it felt like I'd been gaslighting myself. The worst part was remembering Mom's face, how soft it would get when Zach walked into a room, like he brought in a breeze of relief with him. She always said he just needed direction, that his heart was good, but maybe she just didn't want to admit what she already knew. "I gave him the house, Linda," I said, my voice cracking, even though I didn't want it to. "Mom left it in both our names, and I didn't want to fight over it. I told myself he needed it more than me, that he had no one else." Linda's eyes tightened. "He told people he bought that house for you." I stared at her, not understanding. "What?" "He's been going around town, church friends, Even that community group your mom used to go to, telling people he took care of you after the funeral, that you were too broken to handle anything, that he stepped up when nobody else would. I felt something shift inside me, like a wire snapping. It wasn't about the money anymore. It wasn't about the card, the stupid jacket, or even Shelley's smug little smile. It was the fact that he'd rewritten the narrative so cleanly, so easily, that people actually believed it. People I'd grown up with thought I was the one clinging to Zach for help, that he was some kind of saint who dragged me through grief while I just sobbed in the passenger seat. He'd turned himself into a hero, in a story where he was, at best, the guy who showed up during the credits and took a bow. I want everything back, I said suddenly, standing up. I want the house, the money, the truth. I want people to know what he did. Linda didn't say anything for a long while. Then she reached into her cabinet, poured us both a glass of lemonade that was a little too tart, and said, "Then you'd better get smart. Because that boy's been playing chess while we've all been playing checkers." I nodded slowly, mind already spinning. Because if Zach had rewritten the past, then I was going to make damn sure I controlled the future, and I knew exactly where I was going to start. If there's one thing my brother has always been good at, it's pretending he's the victim while quietly setting the fire himself. He'll walk into a room where the walls are already charred, look around with wide eyes, and say something like, "Wow, how did this happen?" knowing full well he was the one who struck the match. That's what I kept coming back to as I pulled into his driveway later that week, staring at the gaudy lawn sculpture he must have bought recently, a massive chrome bird bath shaped like a lotus, reflecting the sun like it was auditioning for a car commercial. Zach didn't own anything subtle, and the moment I saw that bird bath, I knew he wasn't worried. He was still playing king in a world I hadn't started unraveling yet. The only reason I went over was to gather more evidence. The police were being helpful, but they needed more than a grainy photo and a pile of charges. They wanted receipts, proof of intent, a pattern. And I knew Zach better than anyone. He wouldn't be able to resist showing off what he bought. He loved an audience, even if the applause came from someone clapping slow and sarcastic. He greeted me like nothing had happened. Same big grin, same Dana, long time no see, as if I hadn't confronted him about credit card fraud less than a week earlier. He offered me iced coffee like we were brunch buddies. I took it, not because I wanted it, but because sometimes the best way to get close to a snake is to let it coil around your wrist. Inside, the place looked like a showroom. Not a home, never a home, but something you'd see staged in a real estate ad. All shine and no soul. There was a new espresso machine sitting on the kitchen counter, top of the line, chrome knobs, digital display. A dozen little jars lined the backsplash, labeled with things like Madagascar vanilla and organic turmeric. Shelley walked in mid-scroll on her phone, barely looked up before saying, "Hey girl," like we were high school friends at a reunion. She wore a silky robe that probably cost more than my car's monthly insurance and had matching slippers, the fuzzy kind with rhinestones. My stomach turned, but I smiled. "Love your new setup," I said, running my finger along the marble island. "You two must be doing really well." "Oh, you know," she replied, shrugging like wealth just fell from the sky if you smiled at it long enough. "Zach's been amazing. He just gets how to make life work for us." Zach grinned like she'd said he walked on water. I watched his chest puff up. That was the thing. He didn't even need to lie. Other people did it for him. We chatted. I let them ramble. I asked casual questions, feigned admiration. Every answer was another thread I could pull later. Shelley mentioned a spa day she'd had last Tuesday, the exact date of one of the unknown charges. She even described the lavender wrap and the face diamond treatment, which sounded made up but apparently cost nearly $1,000. Zach joked about how she was his expensive habit. I laughed along with them. I sipped the iced coffee, and all the while, my phone recorded everything from my purse. Before I left, I mentioned offhand that I'd recently installed a new security system at my place. Said it had fancy cameras, motion detectors, the whole 9 yards. Zach looked amused, but Shelley, her face shifted. It wasn't fear exactly, but more like a small crack forming in glass. She tried to cover it with a laugh, but it came too late. I filed that reaction away. Later that night, I got a call from Detective Mason, the officer assigned to the case. He was a blunt man, the kind who probably solved arguments at home with a single raised eyebrow. He spoke in half sentences and preferred facts over emotions, which I appreciated. I told him about the visit, the items I saw, the things I'd heard. He said it was good, not airtight yet, but good. Family cases, he muttered. Always get weird. I asked him what he meant, and he said, because family thinks they're immune to consequences. They think blood protects them. I didn't sleep that night. I laid in bed with my laptop open, going back through every message Zach had ever sent me in the last year. I found screenshots of old emails, casual requests for help with bills, little hints about Mom's wishes, and references to vague debts I'd supposedly promised to cover. None of them were direct enough to qualify as blackmail or threats, but the manipulation was all there, just dressed up in familiar words. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message on Facebook from Shelley. Don't blame him, she wrote. He said you owed him, that you promised. No greeting, no emojis, just that one line. I stared at it, rereading it until the words started to lose meaning. That you promised, that I owed him. And suddenly, I understood something I'd been avoiding. Zach hadn't stolen from me because he was desperate. He'd done it because in his mind, it wasn't theft. He genuinely believed he was entitled to what I had. He believed he was collecting on some invisible debt I never signed for. He thought what's yours is ours meant I was supposed to carry him forever. No matter how far he leaned back. I didn't respond to Shelley. I didn't delete the message either. I took a screenshot, saved it, and added it to the growing folder labeled Zach Evidence on my desktop. It was getting thick. The next morning, I got an email from a luxury furniture store in Zach City. It was a promotional receipt, thanking me for a recent visit and offering a coupon on my next luxury seating purchase. I hadn't stepped foot in that store, but I knew who had. He was leaving a trail, even when he thought he was being clever. That's the problem with people like Zach. They build their lies like houses of cards, forgetting that people like me don't need to blow hard to knock them down. They just need to know where to flick. And I was starting to find the weak spot. There's a certain kind of anger that doesn't scream or throw things or slam doors. It simmers, it plans, it gets quiet, it waits. That's the kind of anger I found myself carrying in the days that followed. I wasn't pacing or ranting anymore. I wasn't calling friends for validation or going over credit card statements for the 100th time. I had already accepted the facts. Zach had taken what didn't belong to him, twisted our family's grief into a personal license for theft, and painted himself the misunderstood saint in a story where he was the antagonist all along. What I needed now wasn't more evidence or even sympathy. I needed strategy. Because what Zach had built was more than just a scam. It was a narrative. And narratives don't just get dismantled by truth. They get dismantled by exposure. Painful, public, undeniable exposure. I didn't tell him I'd spoken to the police again. I didn't mention that Detective Mason had told me the report was escalating and that charges were likely if we could prove a pattern. I didn't tell him about Shelley's Facebook message or the recordings on my phone. I didn't even tell Aunt Linda everything. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I needed her to have plausible deniability in case this all spiraled sideways. The truth is, I didn't want to win a fight. I wanted to end the game, and that meant getting ahead of the next move before it happened. So I invited Zach and Shelley to dinner. I kept it casual, sent him a text that read, "Been thinking, maybe we should talk like adults. One dinner, just us, no drama." He responded within minutes, eager, like he'd been waiting for me to blink. He suggested his place. I suggested mine. He agreed, which surprised me. I figured he'd want to keep the home court advantage, but maybe part of him liked the idea of walking into my space, like a king returning to his castle. Or maybe he just assumed I was caving. Either way, I made a roast, poured the wine, set the table like it was Thanksgiving. I even lit candles. I wanted everything to feel as normal as possible. Because people lie more when they feel safe. They showed up right on time. Zach with his usual charm, wearing a pressed shirt and carrying a bottle of wine I recognized from one of the fraudulent purchases. Shelley looked radiant and uncomfortable, smiling too hard, blinking too fast. I greeted them like I hadn't been stockpiling ammunition against them for weeks. We sat, we ate, we talked about neutral things, the weather, a neighbor's dog, how the city was doing post-pandemic. I let Zach take the lead. He liked attention, and I wanted him to feel in control. He talked about Shelley's upcoming brand partnership, how they were on the cusp of something big, how he was considering a consulting role for small business finance. I nearly choked on my wine, but I kept smiling. Then I leaned forward and said, "You know, I've been doing a lot of thinking about Mom." Zach's eyes narrowed just a touch. "Yeah?" "I think about her last few months," I continued. "How tired she was. How much she wanted peace between us." Shelley looked down at her plate. Zach just nodded, slowly, sensing a turn in the conversation, but unsure of the angle. "I remember when she told us to take care of each other," I said. "To protect each other, no matter what." "Exactly," Zach said, jumping in like he'd been waiting for an opening. "That's what I've been trying to say. She wouldn't want us tearing each other apart. She'd want us to support each other." "Support," I repeated, swirling my wine. "Is that what you call it? What you've been doing?" He blinked. "Excuse me?" I stood up, walked over to the cabinet, and pulled out a small speaker. It was already connected to my phone, which had been resting on the counter since we sat down. I hit play. The recording began with laughter, our conversation from his house the week before. His voice, clear as day, talking about Shelley being an expensive habit, about how he'd been making things work with what he had. Then came her voice, bubbly, proud, mentioning the face diamond treatment and the shopping spree. And then his laugh, that smug, careless laugh, as he said, "Donna doesn't even check her statements. She'll never know." The room went silent. Zach's face dropped, drained of color. Shelley stared at the table like it might give her an escape route. "What the hell is this?" Zach asked, voice brittle. "It's a conversation," I said, sitting back down. "One that's now on file with the police." "You recorded me?" His voice rose just a notch. "I protected myself," I said. "That's what Mom actually wanted, by the way, for us to protect ourselves, to be strong, to not let people use us, even if those people share our blood." Shelley finally looked up, her eyes glossy. "You don't have to go this far," she said quietly. "We can make it right." I turned to her. "You already had the chance. You used my name, my credit, my kindness, and you stood by while he rewrote our history to make me look like some dependent spinster who couldn't pay her own bills. So forgive me if I'm not feeling charitable tonight." Zach stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. "You think this makes you better than me? You think you're so high and mighty just because you spent a few months playing nurse while you disappeared?" I cut in. "While you left me to watch her die alone? You really want to go down that road, Zach?" He stared at me, jaw tight, chest rising and falling like he was holding back something. But there was nothing left to say. I reached for my phone again, dialed quickly, and put it on speaker. "Dana?" Detective Mason's voice came through clear. "Everything okay?" Zach's mouth opened, but I beat him to it. "Everything's fine," I said, staring directly at my brother. "Just wanted to confirm we're ready to move forward with the next steps." There was a pause. "We're ready." I hung up. Zach looked like he might hit something, but instead, he grabbed the bottle of wine, slammed it onto the table hard enough to make the glasses jump, and stormed out. Shelley followed, but not before glancing back one last time. Something in her eyes that I couldn't read. Regret, maybe, or fear, or just the realization that the house of cards was falling and there were no more hands left to keep it upright. I didn't clean the dishes. I didn't finish the wine. I just sat there, staring at the spot where Zach had stood, and thought about how long it had taken me to get here, to stop hoping he'd change, to stop feeling guilty for his failures, to stop confusing loyalty with self-sacrifice. The game was almost over. Now it was just a matter of who got left holding the pieces. There's a particular quiet that settles over you when everything that could be said has already been spoken aloud, when the truth has been dragged into the light, kicking and screaming, leaving behind nothing but scorched ground and uncomfortable silence. In the days that followed that dinner, if you could even call it that, I found myself walking through my house in slow, deliberate movements, not because I didn't know what to do next, but because I finally had the clarity to recognize that the next steps were already in motion. It felt like sitting in the front row of a theater where the play was written by someone else. But this time, I wasn't a passive spectator. I was the one who handed out the scripts, cued the lights, and watched as every carefully concealed lie began to collapse under its own weight. Zach didn't call, didn't text, and for once didn't try to manipulate the silence to his advantage. That was telling. The fact that he hadn't tried to salvage his version of the truth meant he knew the curtain had been pulled too far back. That no matter how slick the words, no matter how many sob stories he rehearsed in front of a mirror, the evidence was louder than anything he could say now. Shelley, on the other hand, made a move I didn't expect. 2 days after the dinner, I received an email from a throwaway account I didn't recognize, with the subject line simply reading, "I'm sorry, please read." I opened it half expecting a final jab, some poorly disguised attempt at guilt tripping, but instead I found dozens of attachments, PDFs of receipts, screenshots of text messages between her and Zach, confirmation emails for luxury orders placed under my name, even a recorded voicemail where Zach bragged about pulling one over on Dana to a friend I didn't recognize. It was like watching someone throw open every door in a house you didn't know had hidden rooms. She didn't explain herself in the body of the email. There were no long paragraphs begging for forgiveness, no grand emotional apology, just one line. "I can't do this anymore. I didn't know how bad it was until I saw your face that night." That was it. And as much as I wanted to hate her, as much as I wanted to drag her into the fire alongside Zach, I couldn't ignore the fact that what she sent was exactly what the detective had been waiting for. Detective Mason called me that afternoon, his voice a little more energized than usual, like he'd just been handed the final piece of a puzzle that had been taunting him for weeks. "We've got enough," he said without hesitation. "We're submitting for charges. He's going to be facing identity theft, credit card fraud, and maybe a few more if we dig into the tax side of things." I didn't cry when I heard the words. I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated or victorious. I just felt empty and exhausted, like I'd been running a race I never signed up for and finally crossed the finish line with my shoelaces in knots and my lungs burning. The court process moved faster than I expected. Maybe because the evidence was so clean. Maybe because Zach didn't fight it. Maybe because the system was so used to people like him that the machinery didn't even need oiling. Either way, I found myself sitting in a courtroom 3 weeks later, watching my brother avoid eye contact like it would burn. His lawyer, clearly paid for by someone else, tried to paint a picture of emotional strain, of grief clouding judgment, of a man who had simply lost his way in the wake of his mother's death. I wanted to laugh, but instead I sat with my arms crossed and waited for my turn to speak. When they asked me if I had a victim impact statement prepared, I said yes and walked to the stand with the paper in my hand, though I barely glanced at it. I had rehearsed it so many times in my head that the words had branded themselves behind my eyes. I didn't start with anger. I didn't start with accusations. I started with a memory, one I hadn't spoken aloud in years. "I remember the night our mother died," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I remember sitting in that room, holding her hand while her breathing slowed, and telling myself that no matter what happened next, I'd find a way to keep this family together. I lied to myself that night, because what I didn't understand was that some people are only connected to you by blood, not by love, not by respect, and certainly not by trust." I watched Zach's face twitch slightly at that, but he didn't look up. "I gave you everything I could, Zach," I continued. "Pam's space, understanding, even the house we both inherited. And still, you looked at what I had and decided it should be yours. Not because you needed it, but because you believed you were owed something. You took money, yes, but you also took dignity, reputation, and peace. You used our mother's words like a shield while stabbing me with your actions. That's not family, that's theft. I paused then, not for effect, but because I wanted the silence to settle. You once told me, what's yours is ours. Well, let me say this clearly. What's mine is earned. What you took was stolen, and what you lost is permanent. I walked back to my seat. The judge nodded, the clerk scribbled notes, and Zach finally looked up, just for a second, and I saw something in his face that I hadn't seen before. It wasn't guilt, it wasn't sorrow, it was recognition. The moment when someone realizes the consequences weren't just real, they were personal. He didn't say a word as the charges were confirmed. He stood when they asked him to. He didn't argue when the bailiff escorted him out. I returned home that night to find the police report still sitting on my dining table, right where I had left it weeks ago, folded beside an empty coffee mug and a notebook full of questions I didn't need to ask anymore. I picked it up, ready to finally toss it into the shredder, but then paused when I noticed the second paper beneath it. I had forgotten about the additional report I filed, not against Zach, but for a different name. A quiet, cautious insurance policy. A just in case. The name at the top read Michelle Tanner, which I now knew was Shelley's legal name. I hadn't decided what to do with it yet. Maybe I never would. Maybe I already had enough closure. Or maybe, just maybe, I was holding on to it because deep down, I understood that people like her don't just disappear. They wait. They rebrand. They move on. And sometimes you need to keep your knives sharp even after the enemy is gone. As I sat down, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and stared at the folded paper, I realized I didn't need to know how Zach would spin the story later. Because for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't trying to be the bigger person. I was just being done. And that was enough.